Hi, this is Regina Jestrow. This workshop is in partnership with the Frank C. Ortis Gallery and the City of Pembroke Pines. Some of my quilted artworks are included in this fall's exhibition Warp and Weft, curated by Taryn Mahler-Nicole. I'm a visual artist living in Miami, Florida, and originally from Queens, New York. My mother taught me how to sew and crochet when I was a kid, and I have utilized these skills throughout my art practice. I attended school for photography, but when I moved to Miami, I switched my focus to quilting and sewing to cope with homesickness. My ongoing interests in women's history and patterns of American quilt traditions led me to develop a body of work that includes paintings, drawings, textile wall hangings, wearables, and sculptural installations. I found much needed solace in my home studio in 2020. The Americana Quilt series began during the Black Lives Matter protest as the coronavirus pandemic was spreading. I began to look deeper and research America's race history and my relationship and connection with what was happening around me. While researching American women activists during political movements such as civil rights, anti-slavery, and suffrage movements, I've discovered that quilts were sometimes used to further these causes. Quilts have been used as a means of education, storytelling, record-keeping, fundraising, and support, and for banners during protests. My quilts consist of a combination of secondhand clothing and new cotton fabrics. The varied colors are representative of the flesh tones of the American population as well as the American landscape. My abstraction of traditional repeat patterns are meditatively sewn together with frayed edges of the fabrics exposed. Using the sewing machine as a drawing tool, rhythmic flowing lines mimic and accentuate these patterns. Many of the earlier pieces are stretched on panels or stretcher bars, and are hung on walls like paintings. Works on paper are sometimes used as a daily sketching exercise, or as a reference or a test for larger works. Here is a freeform quilt created after the one on paper was all figured out. Larger artworks are free form and hang from wooden supports. There is space between the wall and the hung quilt, displaying the natural draping of the textile. Here is a detail of the lines, the edging, and the spacing between the wall and the textile. Some of the free-form quilts have extra stuffing to create additional texture, more dimension, and are more sculptural. Here is a detail showing off the extra stuffing in the red and gray borders, with the various dimensions and distancing from the wall. Trapunto is the name of the technique where extra stuffing or batting is placed in select areas of the quilt. Here is a detail of the extra stuffed borders. The red and brown borders are first quilted and then additional batting is added. Again, adding various dimensions and somewhat puckered off the wall. Thank you for taking some time to watch this presentation today. Today I'll be showing you how to make tote bags with some second-hand and repurposed textiles. The center bag is the one we are making today. These examples include textiles from an army uniform left over from a film a friend of mine was making, an old pair of khaki pants. Pants are great for long handles. Leftover fabric from previous quilts, leftover fabric from mask making projects, and some donated fabrics from friends. First, let's gather some of our supplies. You'll need some muslin, some fun fabrics, a lining fabric, thread, an iron, pins and needles, some cutting tools, straight edges. You'll also need a sewing machine, and some pens and markers or pencils for marking. Both the lining and the muslin need to be 15 inches by 34 inches, and you'll need 2 strips that are 6 inches by 34 inches for the handles. Cut the fun fabrics into various sized strips. Make sure the length of the strips is slightly longer than the width of the bag. Lay the first strip of fabric on top of the muslin along one edge, right side up. Stack the next strip right sides together, edge to edge with the first strip. Then pin in place, starting in the center and moving outward. With the sewing machine, sew the 3 layers together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After you sew the 3 layers together, flip over the top strip so it's right side up. Using an iron, press the seam down to flatten and reduce any wrinkling. Repeat the last 3 steps until the entire surface is covered with strips. The exterior of your bag now should look something like this. I added some pink stitching along both sides of each seam, and you could do the same, or you could do more embroidery, or you could do less. Now, with the wrong side facing you, cut off the excess overhanging fabrics. Fold in half right sides together. Place your straight edge along one side. Then cut each side one at a time. Keeping your fabric folded, you're going to want to pin up each side before sewing. Then sew each side starting at the top or the opening of the bag. I usually do a straight stitch and then a zigzag stitch to make it stronger. Now, fold the bag so the seams are centered and matching each other. The bottom will fold inward and you'll have something that looks like a house. On each side, measure 2 inches from the bottom corner. Mark with a pencil or a pen and then pin in place. Sew each corner like you did the sides and then cut off the excess fabric to reduce the bulk. Now the lining. Put that beautiful bag exterior to the side so you can focus on getting the lining done. Fold the lining in half, right sides together. You're going to repeat the last 5 steps to complete the lining of the bag. To join the lining to the exterior, you're going to have to turn the lining right side out and the exterior bag right side in. Place the lining inside the exterior so the right sides are facing each other. Line the side seams up so they match. Pin all the way around. Mark with pins a 5-inch gap. Sew along the pin edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Start and stop at each end of the marked gap. Pull the exterior fabric through the hole so all the right sides are exposed. Push the lining into its intended position inside of the bag. Iron the seams down to minimize the exposure of the lining. Pin the seam opening closed and then sew all the way around with a 1/8 inch seam allowance and then a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now for the handles. Follow these steps twice to complete 2 handles that are needed for the tote bag. Fold this strip of fabric in half and press. Unfold after ironing. Fold each side toward the center and press again. Fold in half one more time and then iron one last time. Your straps should measure 1.5 inches by 34 inches long. Sew along each edge with a 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then one time down the center of each strap. Lay the bag flat on the table and mark the center with a pin, and then mark 3 inches out from the center left and right. Pin each end of the 34-inch strip on the inside of the bag, following the pins for proper spacing. Sew each end of the handle into place with a 1/8 seam allowance. I usually do a square and the X in the center. To attach the second handle, use the first handle as a guide. First, fold the attached handle back. Lay each end of the second handle inside the bag, lining it up with the top one. Pin each end into place. Line up the length of the handles so they tuck into each other. Carefully flip the bag over, double checking the fit and the placement. Sew each end into place just like you did for the previous handle. This is how I pinned and sewed my handle because it was about 40 inches long instead of 34 inches long. And now your tote bag is complete. I hope you enjoyed the workshop and come by the show at the Frank. Thank you.